Case 1. The disappearance of the Sodder children, 1945. Christmas Eve should have been a night of celebration for the Sodder family. Instead, it became the starting point of one of America's most unsettling unsolved cases. On December 24, 1945, George and Jenny Sodder went to bed in their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, with 9 of their 10 children under one roof. Hours later, 5 of those children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were never seen again. A house fire consumed their 2-story home just after 1 a.m. But what remained afterward wasn't just devastation. It was a void that has never been filled. The blaze destroyed the house by dawn. Local officials moved quickly to rule it an electrical fire, based on the assumption that faulty wiring ignited the structure. A coroner's jury agreed, and within days, death certificates were issued for all 5 missing children. The explanation might have sufficed, if not for one glaring fact. No trace of the children was ever found in the ashes. No bones, no teeth, no remnants that could confirm they had perished in the fire. The official stance was that the heat of the fire had reduced their remains entirely, but this claim didn't sit well with George and Jenny. The family consulted cremation experts, who pointed out a troubling inconsistency. Even in professionally operated crematoriums, where temperatures can reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours, human bones are not fully incinerated. And yet, the fire at the Sodder home had burned for less than 4 hours, and not even fragments were discovered. This led the family to a gut-wrenching question. Had their children really died in that fire, or had something much darker occurred? From the beginning, the fire and its surrounding circumstances raised concerns. Jenny had noticed earlier that evening that the Christmas lights in the house were still glowing during the fire's early moments, something that shouldn't have been possible if faulty wiring had been the cause. A telephone call came in just after midnight, reportedly from a wrong number. When Jenny answered, the caller asked for someone unfamiliar and then laughed strangely before hanging up. She later discovered the home's phone line had been physically cut, not burned. Outside, the family's ladder, normally kept against the side of the house, was missing. It was later found down a nearby embankment, far from where it would have been needed. George's 2 coal delivery trucks, which had worked perfectly the day before, now refused to start, preventing any attempt to drive for help or use the vehicles for rescue. A neighbor reported seeing a man stealing a mechanical tool from the property around the same time. All of it pointed to deliberate interference. Authorities initially searched the site only briefly. Despite the lack of remains, the area was declared clear. Days later, in his grief, George bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site, creating a makeshift memorial and unintentionally sealing off any chance for a more complete forensic investigation. That decision, though made from a place of sorrow, closed the door on answers for decades. As law enforcement closed the case, the Sodders opened their own. They began to suspect not only that the fire was intentional, but that it had been a cover-up for a kidnapping. This theory seemed unthinkable, yet a string of eerie encounters began to surface. Several witnesses came forward to claim they had seen the missing children in the days following the fire. One woman said she had seen them peering from a vehicle while the house was burning. Another claimed she served them breakfast at a rest stop a week later, in the company of adults who seemed hostile and secretive. Suspicion deepened when the family recalled past arguments with a former insurance salesman who had grown angry at George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. He had warned him ominously that his home would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. That same man, as it turned out, later sat on the very coroner's jury that concluded the children had died in the fire. In 1949, the Sodders requested a new excavation of the fire site. During the dig, investigators found a few vertebrae fragments. These were sent to the Smithsonian Institution, where anthropologists concluded the bones came from a male aged 16-22. The problem, Maurice, the oldest missing Sodder child, was only 14. Moreover, the vertebrae showed no signs of fire exposure. Smithsonian officials concluded the bones most likely came from the dirt George had bulldozed in, meaning they were likely unrelated to the children at all. One of the most haunting developments came years later. In 1967, Jenny Sauter received a photograph in the mail from an anonymous source in Kentucky. On the back was a cryptic message and what appeared to be a picture of a young man bearing a strong resemblance to Louis Sauter had he grown into adulthood. A private investigator was dispatched to follow up, but vanished without a trace himself. The lead went nowhere, leaving yet another layer of mystery in a case already filled with unanswered questions. As decades passed, the family's hope never waned. George and Jenny erected a billboard along U.S. Route 19 with portraits of their 5 missing children and details of the case. It remained there for nearly 40 years, drawing visitors, investigators, and curious passers-by. The message was simple but powerful: help us find the truth. By the time Jenny passed away in 1989, the family had exhausted nearly every possible lead. Their youngest child, Sylvia, continued to advocate for answers until her own passing in 2021. She often said, "My mom always believed they were taken, and I believe it too. You don't stop being a mother just because time passes." Officially, the disappearance of the Sauter children remains closed, at least on paper. No suspects have ever been charged. No remains have ever been conclusively linked to the 5 missing children. For many, the case remains a tragic cautionary tale about rushed conclusions, ignored red flags, and the deep human need for answers. But for the Sauter family and those who knew them, it was never about theories. It was about 5 children who vanished into the night, and a truth they were never allowed to bury. Where are you watching from? Drop your locations in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop your comment with "I am still here." Let's see who is still watching. Case 2. The Springfield 3, 1992. The morning of June 7, 1992, was supposed to be filled with celebration, rest, and maybe a bit of sleep after a night of graduation parties. But for 3 women in Springfield, Missouri, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter, Susie Streeter, and 18-year-old Stacy McCall, that morning marked the beginning of one of the most disturbing and enduring mysteries in American true crime history. The 3 vanished overnight from Cheryl's modest home on 1717 East Delmar Street. No one saw or heard anything unusual. There were no witnesses, no sounds of struggle, and no apparent forced entry. They were simply gone. On the evening of June 6th, Susie and Stacy had just graduated from Kickapoo High School. Like most teens marking the end of a chapter, they spent the evening bouncing between parties. Initially, they'd planned to stay at a friend's house, but the space became too crowded. Around 2:15 a.m., they made the decision to spend the night at Susie's house, where Cheryl had been home alone. Cheryl herself had last been heard from earlier that night when she spoke to a friend around 11:15 p.m. The next day, when neither Susie nor Stacy showed up for planned family activities, concern started to build. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, tried calling the house, but got no answer. She drove over to check in. What she found inside was both chilling and perplexing. The front door was unlocked. All 3 women's purses were sitting neatly in the living room. The beds appeared to have been slept in. Makeup had been removed, jewelry left behind, and the clothing worn to the parties had been folded. Even Susie's dog, Cinnamon, was inside, clearly unsettled but unharmed. Nothing looked ransacked. Nothing was stolen. There were no broken locks, no signs of forced entry. The only minor oddity was the broken glass cover on the front porch light, something that could have been unrelated. But something else did stand out. Janice McCall noticed the answering machine had one message, described later as "strange." In her attempt to review it, she accidentally erased it, eliminating what may have been the only clue left on record that morning. From there, everything spiraled into uncertainty. Springfield police responded quickly, but in those early hours, they didn't treat the house as a potential crime scene. Multiple friends and family had already come and gone, moved items around, and cleaned up broken glass before detectives arrived. This unintentional contamination would later make forensic processing nearly impossible. And yet, even with those early missteps, police quickly realized they weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. These weren't 3 women who had run off. Something serious had happened here. The case pulled in local and federal authorities. Detectives processed thousands of leads. Helicopters scanned nearby forests and rivers. dive teams were dispatched. Canvases extended across Springfield and beyond. Every known associate, former partner, and distant family contact was questioned. But every promising lead ended the same way, at a dead end. In 1997, a name began surfacing again and again: Robert Craig Cox. A convicted kidnapper and known offender, Cox had been living in Springfield at the time of the disappearances. His criminal record dated back years, including time served for abducting a woman in Florida. While under questioning, Cox gave conflicting stories about his whereabouts on June 7, 1992. Initially, he claimed he had been with his girlfriend at the time. Later, she admitted he had instructed her to lie. Even more unsettling, in an interview with a journalist in 1997, Cox stated that he knew the three women were dead and that their bodies would never be found, but he refused to give any further detail. Law enforcement have never confirmed Cox as a viable suspect due to lack of physical evidence, and he has a history of making inconsistent and attention-seeking claims. In the early 2000s, new attention was brought to a possible burial site beneath a hospital parking garage in Springfield. A tip had suggested that the three might be buried there. Investigators used ground-penetrating radar to examine the area, and while anomalies were detected, police ultimately decided against excavating the site, citing insufficient evidence and the cost involved. This decision has remained controversial among followers of the case, some of whom believe it was a missed opportunity. The community, meanwhile, never gave up. Billboards went up. Candlelight vigils were held. A reward fund was established and continues to grow. As of 2025, the reward stands at $43,000 for information leading to the discovery of the women's whereabouts or the conviction of a suspect. Over the decades, Springfield police have logged more than 5,000 tips. Each one is filed and cross-referenced, but to date, not a single piece of physical evidence, no remains, no personal belongings, has ever been recovered outside the home. Detective David Asher of the Springfield Police Department, one of the many officers to have overseen the case, has called it the most confounding disappearance I've ever seen. The FBI and Missouri State Highway Patrol have also been consulted over the years, but no new developments have led to charges. Authorities have continued to appeal for information, even exploring advanced forensic databases and re-interviewing old witnesses, but without DNA or material evidence, options remain limited. Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall were vibrant, social young women with no known enemies or dangerous affiliations. Cheryl Levitt, a cosmetologist, was described by friends and co-workers as kind, private, and deeply devoted to her daughter. Nothing in their background suggested risk. No threats had been made, no stalkers, no warnings. They were, by all appearances, ordinary people living in a safe neighborhood, until, without explanation, they were not. In the years since, Janice McCall has become a quiet symbol of persistence. She has continued to give interviews, raise awareness, and push law enforcement to revisit the case. "I just want to bring my daughter home," she said during a 2022 local interview, "even if it's only to lay her to rest properly." As time passes, the mystery doesn't fade, it deepens. The house where the women disappeared has since been remodeled, the porch light replaced, the rooms painted over. But for those close to the case, time has done little to blur the outline of what happened, or didn't happen, inside those walls. There were no witnesses, no sounds of a struggle, no getaway car, and yet 3 people simply vanished. As of June 2025, it's been 33 years. The Springfield Police Department maintains an active file, and investigators still treat every new tip seriously. Yet in a world where forensic science has closed cases once thought unsolvable, the Springfield 3 remain just as missing as they were the morning after graduation night. Case 3. The disappearance of Brian Schaffer, 2006. Brian Schaffer walked into a crowded bar in downtown Columbus. Security cameras confirmed it. Friends confirmed it. He was smiling, casual, enjoying the start of his spring break. But there is no footage of him walking out. No one saw him leave. And since that April night in 2006, not a single person has been able to say where he went or what happened to him. At 27 years old, Brian was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University. He had a promising future, a loving family, and a girlfriend he planned to propose to. On March 31, 2006, the first night of spring break, Brian and his close friend, Clint Florence, began the evening at a bar near campus before making their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a popular second-floor bar in the South Campus Gateway area. The mood was upbeat, and Brian reportedly had a few drinks, but nothing suggested he was distressed or behaving unusually. Surveillance footage at the Ugly Tuna Saloon shows Brian arriving at approximately 1:15 a.m. He is seen again at 1:55 a.m., standing at the top of the escalator, chatting briefly with two women. After saying goodbye, he turns to walk back inside the bar, and then disappears. That was the last confirmed sighting of Brian Schaffer. The next morning, when Brian didn't return home or show up for his planned trip to Miami with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, she became worried. Calls to his phone went unanswered. His car was still parked outside his apartment. There was no activity on his credit cards, no banking transactions, and no use of his cell phone, except for one anomaly. Several days after his disappearance, Brian's phone rang and briefly connected to a cell tower in Hilliard, a suburb northwest of Columbus. Investigators believed this was likely due to a system glitch or a phone briefly powered on, not a sign of movement. As soon as Brian was reported missing, Columbus police launched a detailed investigation. They reviewed hours of surveillance footage not only from the Ugly Tuna Saloon, but from every surrounding business and alleyway. The bar had only one known public entrance and exit, via the escalator, and all others were secured or covered by cameras. Despite analyzing every angle, authorities could not find any image of Brian leaving the premises. He had simply vanished. Authorities searched the surrounding area thoroughly, including dumpsters, parking garages, construction zones, and rooftops. At the time, the area around the bar included several unfinished sites, but no signs of an accident or injury were ever found. Police interviewed everyone who was with Brian that night, including his friend Clint Florence and another mutual acquaintance. Clint, notably, declined to take a polygraph test, citing legal counsel, which drew public scrutiny. However, police stated there was no physical evidence implicating anyone and emphasized that no person was officially considered a suspect. In the days that followed, Brian's family worked tirelessly to keep his name in the news. His father, Randy Schaffer, led local searches and participated in multiple media interviews. Randy remained vocal, appearing on national television, speaking with private investigators, and pleading for information. He never gave up. Tragically, in 2008, just 2 years after Brian's disappearance, Randy died in a freak accident during a windstorm, when a branch fell on him outside his home. His obituary included a hopeful message, expressing belief that one day Brian would be found. Investigators and experts began piecing together a handful of theories. The first suggested that Brian might have suffered an accident inside the bar, perhaps falling or experiencing a medical emergency, and that his body was moved through a rarely used service area. However, the Ugly Tuna Saloon had no documented evidence of such movement, and employees present that night saw nothing suspicious. There were also no traces of blood, damage, or unusual activity. A second theory proposed that Brian had walked out, using an alternate exit not captured on camera. While technically possible, this scenario would have required navigating a restricted service area, possibly through a poorly lit alley that was under construction. Yet again, no one reported seeing him leave, and searches of the construction zone turned up nothing. The third theory, that Brian voluntarily disappeared, has generated the most speculation but the least hard evidence. Some believed that the stress of medical school and the recent death of his mother, Renee Schaffer, might have pushed him to abandon his life and start over elsewhere. However, his actions that night didn't match someone planning an escape. He had booked a flight to Miami with Alexis. He had left behind his car, his bank account untouched, and taken no clothes or identification. Even seasoned detectives noted that voluntary disappearances almost always leave behind some form of trace. Brian left none. Investigators even explored the possibility that he was targeted for reasons unknown. But without evidence of a threat, a motive, or a suspect, the case continued to stall. National agencies like the FBI and Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation have offered support, but no forensic leads have emerged. In 2021, the BCI released an age progression image of Brian, showing what he might look like at age 42. They hoped the visual might spark recognition or draw out a long silent witness. But as of 2025, no meaningful tips have surfaced. Brian Schaffer's story has taken on a kind of cultural permanence. Online forums, podcasts, and true crime communities continue to explore every angle. Armchair detectives dissect surveillance videos frame by frame. Yet, the facts remain fixed. Brian walked into the bar and, as far as all available records show, never walked out. There's no body, no confirmed sighting, no goodbye. His girlfriend, Alexis, reportedly continued to call his phone every day for months after he disappeared. It would ring, then go to voicemail. Eventually, it stopped ringing altogether. For those who knew him personally, Brian was warm, witty, and ambitious. He loved music and had once told friends that if he wasn't a doctor, he'd be a singer in a band. He was close to his family and had been planning to propose to Alexis in Miami, a trip he never made. Those who knew his character find it difficult to accept that he would leave them behind without a word. Today, his case remains active with the Columbus Division of Police. It is considered an open missing persons investigation, and law enforcement continue to accept tips and examine leads. Despite advancements in surveillance tech, digital forensics, and facial recognition, not a single confirmed trace of Brian Schaffer has emerged in 19 years. Case 4. The disappearance of Maura Murray, 2004. A snow-covered road in rural New Hampshire. A single car crash. A driver who declined help. And then, nothing. On February 9, 2004, 21-year-old Maura Murray disappeared under circumstances that still leave more questions than answers. A nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Maura's vanishing became one of the most studied and speculated cases of the early internet age, an enduring mystery that continues to confound investigators, journalists, and her own family over 2 decades later. In the days leading up to her disappearance, those closest to Maura began to notice subtle but uncharacteristic shifts in her behavior. On February 5th, she experienced a breakdown during her shift at the university's campus security office. When her supervisor arrived, Maura was reportedly disoriented and in tears. No specific cause for her distress was ever disclosed, and the incident was quietly noted but left unresolved. 2 days later, on February 7th, Maura borrowed her father's Toyota Corolla and drove into town. That night, she crashed the vehicle into a guardrail near Hadley, Massachusetts. Her father, Fred Murray, was staying in a nearby motel and came to assist her. While alcohol was involved earlier in the evening, no sobriety tests were conducted at the scene. The incident was minor, but coupled with her earlier distress, it added to a pattern of unusual behavior that family and friends would later revisit in detail. Then came Monday, February 9th. Maura emailed her professors and employer, informing them that she needed to take a week off due to a family emergency. But there was no emergency. No family member had passed away, and no travel plans had been shared with anyone in her close circle. That afternoon, she withdrew $280 from an ATM, nearly all the cash she had. She then visited a nearby liquor store and purchased about $40 worth of alcohol, including boxed wine and assorted bottles. Surveillance footage showed her alone and calm. By 4:30 p.m., Maura had left Amherst, driving her black 1996 Saturn sedan northward toward the White Mountains. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She brought with her a few personal belongings, school textbooks, and her birth control pills. But she left behind other essentials, including most of her clothes and her favorite stuffed animal, which she usually traveled with. As she drove through Vermont into New Hampshire, daylight faded and snow continued to fall. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a resident on Route 112 in the town of Haverhill, New Hampshire, called emergency services to report a car accident. The black Saturn had run off the road and into a snowbank. The caller said a young woman appeared to be uninjured but shaken, A local school bus driver, Butch Atwood, also passed the scene and stopped to offer assistance. Maura declined, saying she had already called AA. Atwood later told police he found that odd. There was no cell reception in the area. He drove home and contacted the authorities. When law enforcement arrived at the scene at approximately 7:46 p.m., just 19 minutes after the initial call, Maura was gone. The driver's side of the car had sustained damage, but not enough to suggest serious injury. The airbags had deployed. Inside the vehicle, police found an empty beer bottle and a boxed wine container with a broken seal. Maura's debit card and cell phone were missing. Her textbooks, clothes, and a bag of toiletries remained. One of the most puzzling details was a rag discovered stuffed into the tailpipe of the car, an action that may have been intended to reduce engine noise or perhaps to deal with mechanical issues. To this day, its purpose is unclear. A wide-ranging search was launched immediately. Law enforcement, joined by volunteers and K-9 units, canvassed the surrounding woods and roadways. Helicopters and ground teams scoured the area in harsh winter conditions. The dogs traced Maura's scent approximately 100 yards east from the crash site, before it disappeared, as if she had entered another vehicle, or the scent was disrupted by wind and snow. Despite the urgency, the initial search yielded nothing. At first, authorities considered the possibility that Maura had voluntarily disappeared. She had, after all, packed some belongings, withdrawn money, and fabricated a reason to leave campus. Yet as more time passed with no sign of her using credit cards, contacting loved ones, or logging into email accounts, investigators began to reevaluate. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit later reclassified the case as a suspicious disappearance, suggesting that foul play could not be ruled out. Theories have since multiplied. Some believe Maura succumbed to the elements that night, disoriented, cold, and lost in the woods, but no trace of her has ever been recovered. Others suggest she may have been picked up by a stranger, either willingly or under duress. There were no confirmed sightings of another vehicle near the scene, but the remote location and darkness left plenty of blind spots. A third theory proposes that Maura staged her disappearance, possibly to escape academic pressures or personal challenges, and is still alive under a different identity. Yet this idea lacks evidence. There have been no confirmed sightings, no financial activity, and no digital footprints in the years since. Maura's family, especially her father Fred, has been vocal in pushing for more action from law enforcement. He has conducted private searches, appeared in documentaries, and spoken at press conferences to keep her story alive. "I know she didn't just vanish," he has often said. "Someone knows what happened." Over the years, there have been a handful of promising leads, including items found in nearby wooded areas and supposed sightings, but none have led to confirmation. In 2019, authorities excavated a basement near the crash site after receiving a credible tip. Ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies beneath the concrete, but when the area was searched, no evidence related to Maura was found. In 2021, the New Hampshire State Police released updated age progression images showing what Maura might look like at age 38. The hope was that someone, somewhere, might recognize her. As of 2025, no new breakthroughs have been confirmed, but her case remains open and active, with law enforcement periodically reviewing evidence and accepting public tips. Maura Murray's disappearance lives at the intersection of real tragedy and public obsession. Her story became one of the first missing persons cases to go viral online, leading to Reddit forums, investigative podcasts, and a growing community of digital sleuths committed to finding answers. Some have helped keep the case in the public eye. Others, her family says, have made it harder to separate fact from fiction. What remains is the unshakable truth. A 21-year-old woman left her campus, drove north, and vanished on a quiet stretch of road with no signs of where, or why, she went. Case 5. The Lost Colony of Roanoke, late 1580s. Roanoke Island, present-day North Carolina. It was meant to be England's first permanent settlement in the New World, a bold experiment in colonization, faith, and survival. But by the time Governor John White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, The only evidence of life was a dismantled village and a single word carved into wood: Croatoan. No graves, no bodies, no final messages. The fate of over 100 men, women, and children, including White's own granddaughter, remains one of the oldest and most perplexing unsolved disappearances in American history. The story of the lost colony didn't begin with disappearance, it began with ambition. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favored courtier of Queen Elizabeth II, received a royal charter in 1584 to explore and settle land in North America. That same year, a reconnaissance voyage led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow scouted the outer banks of present-day North Carolina. They returned with 2 Algonquian-speaking Native Americans, Manteo and Wanchese, and glowing reports of the area's fertility and strategic value. Raleigh named the land Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen, and prepared for a more permanent settlement. In 1585, Raleigh dispatched the first full colony to Roanoke Island. Led by Governor Ralph Lane and supported by Sir Richard Grenville, the expedition had a military character. The men, about 100 in total, were to establish an outpost, gather intelligence, and lay the groundwork for future colonists. But the challenges quickly mounted. The group faced food shortages, navigational errors, and deteriorating relations with local tribes, particularly the Secatan. When Sir Francis Drake happened to stop by the island in June 1586 on his return from the Caribbean, the desperate settlers accepted passage back to England. Shortly after their departure, Grenville arrived with supplies, only to find the colony abandoned. He left behind 15 men to hold the fort. None of them were ever heard from again. Undeterred, Raleigh organized a second colony in 1587, this time a civilian group of 117 people, including families and tradespeople. John White, an artist and mapmaker who had been part of the 1585 expedition, was appointed governor. Among the colonists was his daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias Dare. On August 18th, Eleanor gave birth to the first English child born on American soil, Virginia Dare. From the beginning, the 1587 colony faced logistical problems. Their intended destination was the Chesapeake Bay, but the fleet's pilot, Simon Fernandez, insisted they settle at the original Roanoke site instead. Supplies ran low, and relations with local tribes remained fragile. Within weeks, the colonists pleaded with White to return to England for additional support. John White reluctantly departed in late 1587, promising to return as soon as possible. But fate had other plans. Upon his arrival in England, the Anglo-Spanish War was reaching its peak. Queen Elizabeth Amir had commandeered all available ships to defend against the Spanish Armada. White's repeated attempts to secure passage were delayed by embargoes, weather, and shifting political priorities. It wasn't until August 1590, 3 years later, that he finally returned to Roanoke. What he found stunned him. The settlement was deserted. Houses had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed. There were no signs of a struggle, no bones, no remains. The only clues were the letters CRO carved into a tree, and the word Croatoan etched into the palisade post of the fort. These carvings weren't panicked or haphazard. They were deliberate. White had previously told the colonists that if they ever had to relocate, they should carve a message indicating their destination, and if under duress, include a symbol of distress, like a Maltese cross. No such cross was found. Croatoan referred to a nearby island, now Hatteras Island, and the name of a friendly indigenous group allied with the English through Manteo, who had been named Lord of Roanoke by Raleigh. White took this as a promising sign that the colonists may have relocated peacefully. But before he could investigate further, severe storms forced his ship to retreat. He was never able to return. Centuries have passed since that fateful discovery, but the mystery endures. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? One of the most supported theories is assimilation. Historians and archaeologists have long believed that the settlers may have integrated with local tribes to survive. The Croatoan, under Manteo's leadership, were familiar with the English and likely offered shelter. Oral histories passed down through indigenous communities reference pale-skinned or fair-haired members. European-style artifacts, such as metal tools and pottery, have been found at nearby sites historically inhabited by Algonquian-speaking tribes. In the early 1600s, some Jamestown settlers even reported encounters with Native Americans who claimed to have ancestry from the Roanoke people. Another theory points to conflict. Captain John Smith of Jamestown later recounted that Chief Powhatan allegedly told his men that he had ordered the deaths of the Roanoke settlers, claiming they had joined hostile tribes. But without physical evidence, no graves, no remains, this claim remains unverified. Environmental factors may have played a significant role. Tree ring analysis conducted in the late 1990s by researchers at the University of Arkansas revealed that the Roanoke region experienced the worst drought in 800 years during 1587-1589. With crops failing and game scarce, the settlers may have been forced to abandon their outpost in search of food. Joining a nearby tribe could have been a matter of survival. Others believe the colonists may have attempted to sail back to England themselves. Some supplies and small vessels were left behind for them. However, with no navigational expertise and no training in seamanship, such a voyage would have been perilous. A storm or miscalculation could have ended their lives at sea. Despite centuries of speculation, no definitive answer has emerged. Excavations on Roanoke Island, Hatteras Island, and various mainland locations have unearthed clues, but no confirmed burial site or collective settlement has ever been found. Even DNA testing of current Native American populations in the region has not yielded conclusive results, though some continue to explore this avenue. The case continues to capture the public imagination because it sits at the intersection of history, mystery, and origin. These were England's first settlers in the New World. Among them were women, children, and families who risked everything to build a life on unfamiliar shores. The fact that they disappeared without trace, leaving behind no witness, no closure, turns what should have been the first chapter of American colonization into an unresolved prologue. The name Virginia Dare has since become a symbol. To some, she represents the hope and bravery of early settlers. To others, she is the face of what was lost, hundreds of years before the founding of Jamestown or Plymouth. Memorials across North Carolina mark her birth and the colony's vanishing, but none can explain it. To this day, the lost colony of Roanoke remains officially unsolved. The U.S. National Park Service maintains the site as part of Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. Researchers continue to revisit the mystery with new technologies, from LiDAR to ground-penetrating radar. Yet the words carved into weathered wood, Croatoan, still stand as the last known message from the first lost community in American history. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share to your loved ones to protect them from the same tragic happening to them in the future. Case 6. The Disappearance of Asha Degree, 2000. Shelby, North Carolina. It was still hours before sunrise when a driver spotted a small figure walking alone along a rural stretch of Highway 18. It was Valentine's Day. The rain was falling steadily, and the figure, just 9 years old, disappeared into the woods moments later. Her name was Asha Degree, and she would never be seen again. Raised in a loving, disciplined household, Asha was a quiet fourth grader who loved school, played basketball, and read constantly. Her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, made sure their children were sheltered from outside influences. No internet, no late nights, no unaccounted freedom. Asha wasn't a child anyone expected to run away. But in the early morning hours of February 14, 2000, something changed. Around 2:30 a.m., Aquila checked on Asha and her older brother, O'Brien, as they slept in the room they shared. Everything appeared normal. Later, O'Brien recalled hearing a slight creak from Asha's bed, but assumed she was turning over in her sleep. By the time their mother came back into the room around 6:15 a.m., Asha and her backpack were gone. The front door was unlocked. The family dog hadn't barked. There was no note. Nothing suggested where she had gone or why. Within hours, police and volunteers were combing the woods, ditches, and back roads of Cleveland County. The case gained urgency when two separate motorists came forward, both of whom had seen a young girl walking along Highway 18 around 4:00 a.m., roughly a mile from the Degree home. One of the witnesses, a truck driver, said he turned around to offer help, but the girl bolted into the trees and vanished. Her small frame, hairstyle, and clothing matched Asha perfectly. That was the last confirmed sighting. What made her disappearance even more confounding was the storm. Rain had drenched the area that night, washing away much of the ground evidence. K9 teams lost her scent quickly. The thick woods offered endless places to hide, or be hidden. Investigators found no signs of struggle, no footprints that led to a destination, and no indication she'd been taken by force. But the very fact that a child walked alone in such weather, at such an hour, was disturbing in itself. 2 days after the initial search, crews discovered what appeared to be some of Asha's belongings in a nearby tool shed, just off Highway 18. A pencil, a green marker, and a yellow hair bow, items confirmed by her family, were lying dry and undisturbed. The shed's location aligned with where she'd last been seen. Investigators believed she had entered it for shelter, if only briefly. But there were no tracks leading away from the structure, and no witnesses recalled seeing anyone else nearby. For more than a year, the case stalled. The community held vigils, billboards were raised, school children wore ribbons and buttons with her name, but no major developments came, until August 2001. That summer, construction workers in Burke County, over 26 miles away, uncovered a backpack buried in 2 black plastic trash bags. The find wasn't random. It had been purposefully concealed, as if someone had tried to hide it forever. The backpack was confirmed to be Asha's. Inside, investigators found a T-shirt and a library book. Strangely, the book had been checked out from her school library, but it didn't belong to her. The discovery reignited the case. Investigators now had reason to believe someone had taken Asha from the area near her home and transported her elsewhere. But who? And why? In 2016, the FBI revealed that they were looking for information about a 1970s-style green vehicle, either a Ford Thunderbird or Lincoln Mark IV. A new witness tip suggested that such a car may have been seen circling the area the morning Asha disappeared. The vehicle was never identified, but it gave the public something new to watch for, and it hinted that someone might have picked her up from the roadside. Then, years later, nearly 25 years after Asha vanished, a significant shift happened. Between 2024 and 2025, law enforcement began executing search warrants connected to the Dedman family, longtime residents of Cleveland County. Investigators seized a green AMC Rambler from one of the properties, similar in age and description to the car from the 2016 FBI tip. Even more compelling was what forensic analysts found next. DNA recovered from Asha's buried backpack matched a woman named Anna Lee Dedman Ramirez, who would have been just 13 years old at the time of Asha's disappearance. Further forensic analysis identified another DNA profile, Russell Underhill, a now-deceased man who had lived near the search area at the time. Investigators stated publicly that they believed adult assistants had likely played a role in what happened to Asha, either in the incident itself or in the concealment that followed. A former classmate of the Dedman family later told investigators that one of the Dedman sisters had made a disturbing remark during a high school party years earlier. At the time, the comment was brushed off as meaningless, but with new evidence emerging, it no longer felt like a joke. Authorities began re-interviewing witnesses who had never spoken out, or never realized they might know something relevant. Despite these leads, no one has been arrested or charged. The FBI, Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation continue to press forward. They have not stated whether they believe Asha is still alive, but they do believe someone has been withholding the truth. Asha's family, meanwhile, has never stopped believing. Her mother, Equila, continues to speak publicly and attend events honoring missing children. In interviews, she describes Asha as joyful, respectful, and dependable, a child who never wandered far, and never would have left home without a reason. She was our Valentine, Equila said. She still is. The Degree family keeps a small shrine in their home with Asha's photos, school trophies, and handmade cards. Every February, they mark the anniversary not with mourning, but with community prayers and renewed pleas for answers. They believe someone, somewhere, knows the truth. And they believe that after all this time, it's not too late to speak up. Today, a reward of $45,000 remains available for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Authorities stress that even memories thought to be minor, old conversations, vehicles seen, names overheard, could be critical. New forensic technologies continue to develop, and investigators say more tests on past evidence are ongoing. Case 7. The disappearance of Judge Joseph Force Crater, 1930, New York, USA. On a warm August evening in 1930, New York streets were still pulsing with the energy of the Jazz Age. Judge Joseph Force Crater, a rising star in New York's judicial system, stepped into the night after dining with two companions near Times Square and vanished forever. His disappearance would become one of the most iconic unsolved cases in American history, birthing the phrase, "pulling a Judge Crater," and leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions, political shadows, and dead ends that spanned decades. Joseph Force Crater wasn't just any public servant. By age 41, he had ascended rapidly through New York's political and legal ranks. Appointed to the New York Supreme Court by Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt earlier that year, he was already viewed as a man of influence and ambition. But behind the polished courtroom reputation was a man tangled in the undercurrents of power, patronage, and controversy. Crater had ties to Tammany Hall, the powerful and often corrupt Democratic political machine that controlled much of New York City's government. In those years, it was no secret that appointments, judicial or otherwise, often came with hefty under-the-table payments. Crater was rumored to have paid thousands for his seat on the bench. The last known day of his life began with quiet but unusual activity. On August 6, 1930, Crater instructed his law clerk to cash two checks totaling $5,150, an extraordinary sum at the time. He also had the clerk deliver multiple briefcases filled with documents to his Fifth Avenue apartment. What was in those briefcases remains unknown, as both the documents and Crater disappeared without a trace. He then made a few quick stops, including a visit to his barber and a stop at his law office, before meeting his companions, showgirl Sally Lou Ritz and attorney William Klein, at Billy Haas's Chop House in Manhattan. The three dined together, and according to early reports, Crater left the restaurant around 9 p.m. after getting into a cab. However, both Ritz and Klein would later revise their stories, stating instead that Crater simply walked away down West 45th Street. That was the last time anyone saw him. When he failed to appear in court on August 25th, questions turned into panic. His wife, Stella, had been vacationing in Maine at the time and had assumed he was still working in the city. It wasn't until weeks had passed without a single word from him that she reported him missing. What followed was one of the largest investigations the New York Police Department had ever undertaken. The press feasted on the mystery, publishing headlines nearly every day. Theories multiplied. Some believed Crater had fled to avoid testifying in an impending investigation into Tammany Hall's corruption, while others whispered that he had been silenced by those same political interests. With Crater gone, there would be no testimony, no documents entered into the record, and no names exposed. In the middle of this, attention quickly turned to the showgirls he was known to associate with, particularly Sally Lou Ritz and another woman named June Bryce. Both women disappeared from the city within weeks of Crater's vanishing. One of the most chilling developments came months later when a woman named Vivian Gordon, who had connections to many of the same political players as Crater and was reportedly prepared to testify against them, was found deceased under suspicious circumstances in the Bronx. Though officials could not conclusively tie her case to Crater's, the timing and political context made her death appear more than coincidental. Investigators suspected that anyone holding sensitive information was at risk. With Tammany Hall known for its reach and ruthlessness, fear began to stifle witnesses and slow the investigation. The case remained active for decades, occasionally surfacing in the public eye whenever a new lead emerged. In 2005, long after the investigation had gone cold, a curious tip reignited interest. The widow of a former NYPD officer claimed her late husband had confessed to knowing where Crater's body had been buried, beneath the Coney Island boardwalk, near the modern-day location of the New York Aquarium. The widow's note claimed the judge had been killed by a corrupt police officer and his brother. Investigators reviewed old construction records and excavation logs from the 1950s when the boardwalk area had been cleared, but no human remains matching Crater's were ever officially found or reported. Over the years, the idea that Crater had orchestrated his own disappearance gained traction among some circles. One theory suggested he may have faked memory loss or fled to Canada or another country, escaping both the pressure of the investigations and possible threats to his life. Supporters of this theory point to the large sums of money he liquidated in the months before he vanished. Combined with the mystery surrounding the missing documents and his abrupt withdrawal from daily routines, it painted a picture of a man possibly preparing for a calculated exit. Still, there were emotional and personal elements that didn't quite add up. Crater's wife, Stella, remained in the public eye for years, giving interviews and pushing for answers. 6 months after his disappearance, she discovered envelopes containing cash and stock certificates tucked away in a previously searched drawer in their apartment, along with a note, reportedly in his handwriting. Though its full contents were never disclosed to the public, Stella believed the note indicated that Crater had made arrangements to provide for her, suggesting at least some level of premeditation. However, even that couldn't clarify whether he had disappeared of his own volition or been forced into silence. Eventually, Crater was declared legally deceased in 1939, nearly 9 years after he was last seen. His wife was able to collect his life insurance and settle his affairs. In 1979, nearly 5 decades after the disappearance, the NYPD officially closed the case due to the absence of any new evidence. No arrests were ever made. No body was ever recovered. To this day, Judge Joseph Force Crater remains one of the most high-profile missing persons in U.S. history. His story has been the subject of books, documentaries, and urban legends. Despite the passage of time, the unanswered questions continue to haunt historians and armchair detectives alike. Was he a victim of political silencing, a man fleeing scandal? Or did he fall prey to something entirely unrelated that night in Manhattan? The truth, like Crater himself, vanished into the city's shadows and has never returned. Case 8. The Disappearance of Jason Jolkowski, 2001, Omaha, Nebraska. It was a quiet Wednesday morning in Omaha when 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski stepped outside his family's modest home near 48th and Bedford Street. He wasn't headed far, just 8 blocks, a half-mile walk to Benson High School, where he planned to meet a co-worker for a ride to his part-time job at a local radio station. Jason had taken that walk before. It should have taken him less than 10 minutes. But on June 13, 2001, somewhere between his front door and the school parking lot, Jason vanished without a trace. Jason wasn't a troublemaker or someone prone to impulsive decisions. A former honor student and quiet introvert, he'd graduated from Benson High a year earlier and was attending classes at Iowa Western Community College. That summer, he was working shifts at Fazoli's to help pay for school. His car was being serviced that week, so he made the simple plan to meet a colleague at the high school nearby for a ride to work. According to his family, everything about that day began normally. His mother left for work, his younger brother was at home, and Jason even helped bring in the garbage cans around 10:45 a.m., as seen by a neighbor. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. By 11:15 a.m., his co-worker, waiting in the school parking lot, began calling Jason's house. He wasn't answering. Within an hour, concern turned into fear. Jason had never been the type to ghost plans or leave people waiting. It didn't take long before the Jolkowski family reported him missing. The Omaha Police Department responded quickly, initiating what would become one of the most puzzling missing persons cases the city had ever encountered. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, spoke with witnesses, retraced Jason's planned route, and reviewed nearby security footage. Yet, the cameras at Benson High showed no trace of him ever reaching the grounds. From the start, Investigators were baffled by the case's sheer lack of evidence. Jason left no physical trail, no dropped belongings, no signs of distress, no digital footprints. His bank account remained untouched. His cell phone, still relatively new technology in 2001, showed no outgoing calls or texts after he left the house. His car, still at the shop, and an uncashed paycheck were waiting for him at home. There were no personal issues or mental health concerns on record, no behavioral shifts leading up to that day. Jason's family and friends were adamant he had no reason to disappear voluntarily. As the days turned into weeks, the Olkowskis' heartbreak only deepened. Flyers were posted throughout Omaha, and local news covered the story extensively. Yet, leads were scarce. Theories swirled. Some speculated that Jason may have encountered someone he knew along the walk. Others feared he had been targeted by a stranger in a rare, opportunistic incident. But law enforcement found no witnesses to support either possibility. No one heard screams. No neighbors reported anything out of the ordinary. His block, though close to the busy center of town, was a quiet residential street. That made the lack of clues even more unsettling. Foul play became the dominant theory as time passed. Jason's path to the school was short and familiar. He'd walked it before without issue. If he had willingly left with someone, there would likely be a trace. If he had encountered danger, investigators believed there would be signs of a struggle. But in Jason's case, there was nothing. It was as if he had been erased mid-step. The FBI was eventually consulted, but even with federal support, the case grew colder with each passing month. There were no ransom notes, no suspicious calls, and no evidence of online luring, at a time when internet-facilitated disappearances were beginning to rise. Despite the lack of resolution, Jason's story didn't fade entirely from public consciousness. His parents, Jim and Kelly Jolkowski, channeled their grief into advocacy. In the early 2000s, they founded Project Jason, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing persons. The initiative provided emotional support, community connections, and practical resources to hundreds of families navigating the agony of ambiguous loss. Through their tireless efforts, the Olkowskis turned personal tragedy into public service. In 2005, their work helped inspire legislative action. Jason's Law was passed in Nebraska, creating a centralized statewide missing persons database. Before this law, missing adult cases in particular often lacked coordination across jurisdictions. The law mandated timely reporting, streamlined communication between agencies, and increased visibility for ongoing cases. Though it could not bring Jason home, it gave others a better chance. Over the years, authorities have continued to review tips as they arise, though none have produced solid leads. Periodic re-examinations of the case, including searches of public databases and forensic cross-checks, have yielded little progress. Occasionally, reports of unidentified remains surface in surrounding states, prompting DNA comparisons. But all to date have come back negative. The absence of any confirmed evidence has kept Jason's case officially open, yet emotionally suspended in limbo. For his family, the not knowing is the hardest part. Each birthday, holiday, and year that passes is a reminder of unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. His mother once said in an interview that she could handle bad news, but the silence is what haunts her. The idea that someone may know something and has chosen to remain quiet lingers heavily. For many in Omaha, the case remains a chilling reminder of how someone can vanish in broad daylight in the heart of a city, with no sound, no sign, no goodbye. Today, Jason Jolkowski's name endures not only through memory, but also through reform. His story has educated law enforcement, strengthened public policy, and united families of the missing in their shared pursuit of justice and closure. But for those closest to him, progress is not the same as peace. Somewhere out there, the truth still waits. If you have any information related to the disappearance of Jason Jolkowski, you are encouraged to contact the Omaha Police Department or submit a tip to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And if you or someone you know is struggling with loss or uncertainty, resources are available at 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, open 24/7 across the U.S. Case 9, The Disappearance of Tara Calico, 1988. Tara Calico was 19 years old when her routine became a mystery. On the morning of September 20th, 1988, she left her home in Belen, New Mexico for a bike ride she had taken many times before. She had planned a 36-mile loop along Highway 47, expected to be back before noon. Before leaving, she reminded her mother, Patty Dole, to come looking for her if she wasn't home on time, a casual comment that would take on devastating meaning in the hours that followed. That afternoon, Tara never returned. Her neon pink Huffy bike was gone. No note, no sign of delay, only a rising fear that something had gone terribly wrong. Patty's worry grew quickly. She drove along Tara's route, hoping for a flat tire or minor accident. Instead, she found scattered fragments of Tara's Sony Walkman and a broken cassette. To Patty, it wasn't just litter, it was a message. She believed Tara had dropped them intentionally, breadcrumb clues in a desperate attempt to mark her path. Near the scene, there were signs of a brief struggle, skid marks on the pavement, as if a vehicle had stopped suddenly or someone had fallen. But no witnesses saw a confrontation, and the bike was nowhere to be found. What began as a missing persons case soon shifted into something far more unsettling. Witness reports began to trickle in. Several drivers on Highway 47 recalled seeing a young woman on a bike, followed closely by a light-colored pickup truck. The vehicle was described as a 1953 Ford with a camper shell, and one witness claimed it trailed Tara so persistently it appeared to be stalking her. Others confirmed the vehicle was seen circling the area around the same time frame. Despite multiple leads, no one was ever able to identify the driver or link the truck to a specific suspect. Still, the consistent description suggested that Tara was not alone on that highway, and that whoever followed her might have answers. Months passed with little progress. Then, in June 1989, nearly 1,500 miles away in Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman exiting a convenience store made a disturbing discovery. In the parking lot, she found a Polaroid photo lying on the ground. It showed a teenage girl and a young boy, both bound with duct tape over their mouths, positioned on what appeared to be a bed inside a van. The woman called police. The photo was examined, and local authorities quickly saw something chilling. Both individuals looked like missing persons from New Mexico. The girl resembled Tara Calico. The boy bore a strong resemblance to 9-year-old Michael Henley, who had disappeared in the Zuni Mountains the same year. The photo set off a national media storm. Tara's parents were shown the image. Patty believed it was her daughter, pointing to a scar on the leg that matched Tara's, and to a copy of My Sweet Adrena, one of Tara's favorite books, visible next to the girl in the photo. Scotland Yard agreed with Patty's assessment, stating the resemblance was likely, but the FBI was more cautious. Their forensic analysis was inconclusive, and others in law enforcement believed the image was either staged or unrelated. The case of the boy was later resolved separately. Michael Henley's remains were found in the Zuni Mountains in 1990, suggesting he died of exposure, likely not connected to Tara. Still, the identity of the girl in the Polaroid has never been confirmed. The photograph remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the case. Some believe it was a hoax. Others insist it was a sign that Tara had been abducted and transported across state lines. The lack of forensic breakthroughs meant that the image became more myth than proof. Yet for Tara's family, it was more than a clue. It was a moment of possible connection. A reminder that she might still be alive. That someone, somewhere, knew the truth. In the years following Tara's disappearance, new theories emerged. One of the most persistent came from local speculation in Belen that Tara may have been hit accidentally by a group of young men, possibly the son of a law enforcement officer. The story suggested that after the accident, the situation escalated into a cover-up. This theory, though unproven, has circulated for decades, fueled by the small-town dynamics and long silence from possible witnesses. Some residents reportedly feared retaliation. Others claimed to know names but lacked hard evidence. Law enforcement has never publicly confirmed this version of events. For decades, Tara's case remained officially unsolved, but it never faded. Billboards, missing person posters, and national television coverage kept the story alive. In 2003, the FBI formally reopened the case, adding it to the VICAP system, and later offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to her recovery, or the conviction of those involved. Still, no arrests followed. Tips came and went. Most led nowhere. For years, her family pushed for action, often feeling the investigation had been mishandled or stalled. They never stopped searching. Then, in June 2023, a quiet but significant announcement was made. The Valencia County Sheriff's Office revealed they had made meaningful progress. Investigators stated that they were preparing to submit evidence to the District Attorney's Office and had identified individuals who might be responsible. While names have not been released and no indictments made public, the department confirmed they believed the evidence was strong enough to move forward. They did not elaborate on the nature of the evidence, citing the ongoing process. Still, it marked the most substantial update in over 3 decades. As of late 2024, no arrests have been publicly announced. The FBI's reward offer still stands. The photo remains in circulation. The case is officially open. But for Tara's family, and for many who have followed the story for years, the question remains the same. What really happened on that stretch of highway in New Mexico? The answer, after all this time, still eludes closure. Tara Calico's disappearance is not just a cold case, it's a symbol of how some mysteries refuse to settle. Despite advances in technology, nationwide coverage, and generations of investigators, One Morning Ride remains suspended in uncertainty. Whether hidden by fear, accident, or intent, the truth is still waiting to be found. Case 10. The Disappearance of Ray Gricar, 2005. Ray Gricar had dedicated 2 decades to public service as the District Attorney of Center County, Pennsylvania. On the morning of April 15, 2005, at age 59 and only months away from retiring, he told his girlfriend he would take the day off for a drive. At 11:30 a.m., he placed a brief call from his red Mini Cooper, saying he was heading east-northeast on Route 192 toward Lewisburg. That would be the last trace of Gricar that every known account can verify. The man whose career was built on accountability simply vanished. When his car was discovered the following day in a dirt parking lot near Lewisburg, approximately 45 miles from his home in Belafonte, it offered paradoxes instead of answers. Inside the locked vehicle sat his cell phone, a discarded water bottle bearing his DNA, and cigarette ash on the floor. An oddity given that Gricar neither smoked nor tolerated smoking in his car. His keys and wallet were missing. No visible signs of violence or struggle were found. It was as though he'd stepped out and walked into thin air. The scene raised more questions than it resolved. Investigators soon uncovered 2 additional pieces of puzzling evidence. In July 2005, a fisherman retrieved Gricar's county-issued laptop from the Susquehanna River, near a bridge just downstream from where his car had been found. Its hard drive had been removed before the laptop was dumped. 2 months later, in October, the missing drive was found battered and unreadable along the riverbank. Further, a forensic check of the home computer revealed that, in the days before his disappearance, someone had searched terms such as "how to wreck a hard drive" and "water damage to a notebook computer." These facts compounded the mystery. Was Gricar erasing evidence of something, or was he being erased? 3 prevailing theories dominate commentary on the case: that Gricar took his own life, that he vanished voluntarily, or that foul play intervened. The first theory draws on the eerie parallel to his older brother Roy's 1996 disappearance and death by drowning. Gricar's car was found at a riverbank in similar circumstances. Authorities deemed this the most probable outcome, though Gricar's family rejected it based on his upcoming retirement and professional stability. The second theory proposes a voluntary disappearance, fueled by the missing hard drive, the abandoned car, and absence of financial activity, but lacks evidence of a new identity or funds being accessed. The third theory suggests someone connected to his role as prosecutor may have had motive. However, investigators publicly say they found no credible link between his professional duties and his disappearance. Gricar was known by colleagues as diligent, ethical, and methodical. qualities that made him respected but perhaps also isolated. The retirement he planned carried hope for a new chapter: cross-country drives, national park stops, time with his daughter Laura. Yet on that Friday morning, everything seemed routine until it wasn't. His Mini Cooper's abandonment stands out. The keys missing, his phone locked inside, no change on his bank account, email, or credit cards. Since then, no hard evidence has pointed to where he went or why. A component worth deeper emphasis is the human dimension. On the day he disappeared, Grikar had left the county building saying simply he needed a drive. He had completed big cases, taken on formidable defendants, and sat at the apex of his career. He was transitioning out. Yet his final act remains unsettled. One friend described him as the most serious guy, the most ethical guy. That someone grounded in law, order, and consistency could vanish altogether unsettled not only his family, but a legal community unaccustomed to such unresolved disappearance. The discovery of the laptop and missing hard drive signals something deliberate. The car's location, near bridges over the Susquehanna, echoes his brother's death site. The absence of digital footprint or noise suggests more than a casual vanishing. If it was a loss of life by self-inflicted causes, the missing key items and destroyed drive make little sense. If it was voluntary, why no financial trail? If it was foul play, why no credible suspect or partner? The ambiguity deepens with each year. In July 2011, the court declared Ray Grikar legally dead, yet in declaring him dead, it also acknowledged that resolution had not been achieved. His absence remains open in agency files. The Pennsylvania State Police continue to list the case as active and encourage tips through official channels. A reward remains posted for information leading to his recovery or the truth behind his disappearance. In many ways, this is a disappearance devoid of dramatic spectacle. No hostage photos, no ransom demands, no remains found. There's just a locked car, a missing man, a destroyed hard drive, and a river full of unanswered questions. The case is a demonstration of how silence can become the most chilling form of absence. In telling Ray Grikar's story, we are reminded that sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't born in chaos, they emerge in routine. A day off becomes the last day seen, a drive becomes a vanishing, and a life built on solving others' puzzles becomes one unsolved itself. Thank you for your incredible support. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Join our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive perks, enjoy premium content, and help us keep creating the stories you love. Which story do you want to be covered?